Hi, I'm Dr. Vonda Wright, and this is Hot for Your Health. Join us for conversations on the bleeding edge of science, health, and culture as we bring you tech innovators, thought leaders, and the movers and shakers who are transforming science fiction into your new health reality. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you've returned for another episode of Hot for Your Health. And tonight I want to introduce you, although you probably already know her, to an amazing exercise physiologist, nutritionist, and expert to high performers all over the world, Dr. Stacy Sims. And her book, now look at this book, Dr. Sims. Can I call you Stacy for the purpose
of course.
This book I got so many years ago before I really even knew who you were, and I'm pouring through Roar. I'm like, that's right. And then I get this book, and for those of you who haven't read it, your guide to kicking ass, feeling great, and crushing your goals. Like, who doesn't want to live like this? So I'm really excited to have you tonight.
I'm excited to be here. It's been a long time in the making.
I know. I know. Sometimes I feel, I don't know if you feel this way when you read other researchers, but I feel like at least in orthopedics, I've known these people for years. And then all of a sudden I'm actually seeing them for the first time. I'm like, oh, you don't actually know me, but I know your work. So anyway, thank you.
I hear you. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to talk about so many things tonight, but I have really become committed to the idea that you talk about when you open your book, and that's about how the way we think and talk about midlife and menopause matters, right? So, yeah. So tell me about your philosophy of how we should approach midlife before we get into the nuts and bolts of. Yeah. So where did you get it?
So I think I was first exposed to it being a normal conversation when I was doing my postdoc at Stanford, because I was working with Marcia Stefanik, who was one of the PIs for the Women's Health Initiative, and we were doing follow-up studies. And I was also had one hand in human performance. So I was kind of taking some of the concepts of cooling and heating and thermoregulation stuff and applying it to the peri and postmenopausal woman who wasn't athletic, really, just trying to get after hot flashes. And then I met Freddie Kronberg, who was a huge complementary alternative medicine researcher, and just really looking at all these changes that are happening in women that are late 40s onwards. And then we're looking at late postmenopause too. No one wanted to say the word menopause. And I was like, but that's what we're researching. No, we're researching older women. I was like, but we're researching specifically peri and postmenopausal women. And in our bubble, it was really easy to talk about. But when you started getting participants in, they were like, oh, no, it's a bad word. I was like, what? Why? Yeah, whisper it. And it was because they were afraid that they would get stigmatized and put in this box of women that couldn't do anything. That they were now old and decrepit and they weren't able to achieve their work potential, their parenting potential, or anything like that. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting negative way of thinking about just something that naturally happens, how we naturally age. Because you think about men, they age in a linear fashion, right? And so like their decline is over decades, where ours is boom, right here in this like really short period of time. But no one really wanted to talk about it. And so I was sitting and doing a focus group with some of these women. And I was like, well, what if we change it and take more of the Japanese or the Asian culture and talk about it as, hey, this is just a natural part. And now I actually don't have to worry about having a kid or reproducing, and I can achieve potential. I'm just a little bit older. I'm wiser. I have all my lived experiences to draw from. And one of the biggest things was how many people actually give an F of what people think of you right now. And all of them were like, I'm too old for that. I was like, exactly. So that's how kind of through that one focus group really started going, okay, well, let's look at how other cultures examine menopause and realize it's just our Western culture that puts a 20-year-old up at the movies next to a 60-year-old dude and says that's normal and just ignores all the women in the middle.
Yeah. Well, and I love that comparison to Eastern cultures and the thought of, as I've read it, the second bloom, right? We get another opportunity to re-explore. And sometimes I say, you may have written this, I say it out loud, you may have written it somewhere, but I talk about how in my thought that aging is the price of experience. If I want to live richly and with more experiences, then I'm going to age because I can't cram it all into one 24-hour period for, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But it is interesting, this thought, and it's still so pervasive. I mean, in my circles, people know that I am all about your language kicking ass, badassery, don't tell me what I can do or don't define me. I stick up my little finger. But what was so interesting is even in sports circles, I was speaking at the Villages, which is a very active community for people 55 and older. And there was an elite master swimmer there introducing me in the talk. And he said this, and he meant nothing by it, but he said this. He's like, Vonda this, Vonda that. And at 56, she entered her first Spartan race. And I know. I'm about to go on stage and I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, what do you mean by that? Because it never occurred to me. It occurred to me I might fall off a 30-foot rope thing and hurt something, but it never occurred to me that this number, which was over 50, would mean something to people. Do you think we're coming around outside of our circles?
No, because I still get asked by journalists how old I am. I was like, why does that matter? How does it impact a story? You don't see men's ages, but you see women experts and their ages. And I was like, is it because we have to be a certain age to actually be an expert? Or is it, yeah. And when we went and did our presentation to Congress in September, there was a conversation about we had to put slides up with our expertise and our ages and have everyone know that we are experts in the room because we're women. And I was like, I'm not comfortable with putting ages up. Like, what does that have any kind of bearing on? So I still think that there's that stigma. It's kind of a double entendre where women don't want to admit the fact that they're getting older because there's this stigma that all of a sudden that you're not that acceptable and you're not that resourceful, you know. But then on the flip side of it, when you're a woman who has a career and is an expert, they want to know how old you are so that you can prove that you are an expert. But the same thing doesn't happen with men. It's very frustrating.
It's incredibly frustrating. And I think it even pervades what women believe they can do. Because I told you before we started that this book you wrote, Next Level, completely changed my approach to the way I was exercising. I'll say the brand. It was easy. Orange Theory every day. I heard all the time. Yeah, I know. I was doing it. I was an endurance runner. I hesitate to say that in front of real athletes like you, but I ran some hard. I was hurt all the time, predictably. But now that I do cardio with sprint intervals, which we'll get into, right? And I lift heavy because you have taught us to lift heavy. There is still such a mindset every day on my Instagram where people are generous enough to spend time listening to what I say about musculoskeletal. You know, I am an orthopedic surgeon and it makes me know how to fix broken things, right? But they listen. But their first question every time I suggest something, like today, I mentioned you because I was talking about lifting and satellite cells and muscle stem cells for my lab. And Dr. Sims says, lift heavy. All the comments are about questioning our capacity, right? So it even pervades, how can I lift heavy? What is heavy for me? And so I just think it pervades this attitude that we've talked about, that we need to pivot, stop worshiping our youth. At 20, I was still in my parents' house. I had less money than I do now. I wasn't sure of myself, right? All the things. Right? Pivot to face our future even affects how we think we can move our bodies.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. And I get reminded of that when I go to the gym because I go to specific strength development where we are lifting heavy. I'm the oldest woman in the room. Matter of fact, I think I'm the oldest person in the room. They talk about how they're getting old and they're only in their 30s. It's like, And they didn't actually realize how old I was until I said it. And they're like, whoa, and you live so much. And like, yeah, of course. There's like, if you didn't know how old I was, you wouldn't have said anything.
That's right.
So yeah.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about a few of the things that you recommend that taking from your work. And by the way, when I read your book, I did go back and I pulled the studies. I'm just that kind of person. I'm like, I got to read the whole thing. And so, let's first talk about an approach to cardio, because when I say we need to recompose our body and we need to stimulate reproduction of our satellite cells, our muscle-derived stem cells, we need to do that by sprint intervals. People look at me like I am from the moon. So let's talk about what is the science behind going fast? What does that do in terms of building muscle and our muscle stem cells, satellite cells? And your experience with helping people understand they can do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first caveat is when I say sprint interval training, I don't mean necessarily running sprints. Sprint interval is more about the capacity, the top end capacity. So it's 30 seconds or less with at least 3 to 4 minutes recovery in between. So it's not Tabata. It's not, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off interval kind of thing. It's as hard as you can go for 30 seconds, full recovery, then you do it again. And the reason for that, specifically for women who are in peri and postmenopause, is it has to come down to muscle morphology, first of all, where women have more slow twitch anyway. So we're already naturally able to go slow and be fat and all the things that we don't want. We really need to tax into that glycolytic capacity. So that top end anaerobic ATP, CP capacity. And so we need an external stress that is going to stimulate our muscles the way that estrogen and progesterone. So when we're doing these high intensity sprints, it creates an eventual epigenetic change within the muscle itself to, one, create more translocation of those GLUT4 protein gates so that you can now pull glucose in without insulin. So it stabilizes blood glucose. But the other, because it's such a strong, hard stress, the body's like, I've got to build more muscle fibers and have a better neural connection for fast twitch in order to accomplish this task. So it becomes that stress. And the reason we exercise is to create a stress for the body to adapt to get fitter. And this is one of those stressors where we get this huge boost of anaerobic capacity that allows us to maintain power, allows us to maintain speed. It improves our blood glucose, improves the crosstalk between the muscle and the visceral fat through exercise to say, hey, we don't need you visceral fat. We need to boost our glycolytic and anaerobic capacity.
And so many people don't understand when I say this, and I probably need to do a better job, that everybody's fast is their own fast.
Exactly.
Fast you go is different than how fast I go. And it can be on any apparatus, whether it's running on the street, a rowing machine, as long as your heart and your metabolism spikes to the level you're talking about. I do it just this way, 30 seconds, guns to the wall, or whatever the phrase is. And then I almost completely recover. My heart rate comes all the way back down to walking, talking, planning, solving world peace, right?
Yeah.
And so, but only after a full warm up. But there are people, Stacy, who they're just starting out. Sometimes I say we're just, getting up off the chair again for the first time. They're already living in such poor metabolism that they're burning glucose getting up off the couch, right? I mean, that's a really rough place to get from, right?
Yes and no. It depends on the sex. So if we're looking at men, then yes, they are. They're very much carbohydrate driven. But for women, because we have more oxidative or slow twitch fibers, our body is adapted to that. So we have more mitochondria already. We also have more mitochondria density, better mitochondria respiration. We also have more of the proteins that allow free fatty acids to come into the mitochondria. So we're already really good at fat burning. And then when we're looking at carbohydrate and burning carbohydrate and trying to get that kind of glucose control, when you do higher intensity activity, that's when you really tap into the carbohydrate. But for women, we're clearing blood sugar, and then we get into free fatty acid use. But for men, they go through blood sugar, liver, muscle glycogen, and then into more free fatty acid use. So women are
across the age span for women?
Across the age span. When we get into late postmenopause, we see that there's definitely a difference where women's bodies are more like men. They're more metabolically inflexible. They don't, and the reason for it is they don't have any receptor sensitivity to any kind of estrogen and progesterone at all, even, baseline. So that's where you're like, okay, we really have to look at a higher volume, but a lower duration of both resistance training and the high intensity to increase metabolic flexibility. We also see that when you do that high glycolytic work, we get an upregulation of lactate production and a subsequent upregulation of the MCT1s that pull lactate out into our slow twitch, which is why people do zone 2. But for women, we don't need to do zone 2. We need to do more of that glycolytic work because we already have.
I do zone 2. So we never just walk and sprint. That's it.
Well, for zone 2, I call it your soul food, right? So you can do it, but you don't have to put 3 to 4 sessions a week in zone 2.
Oh, no. Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we're looking at it as recovery. We're looking at it as the soul food, but not the precedent of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because we hear those conversations that you have to do 45 or more minutes 4 times a week in zone 2 only. Like if you're a dude, yeah, because you need to increase your oxidative capacity. But for women, we're already there by the nature of our chromosomal makeup. The XX. There's a whole lot of conversations out there about. So put that one on pause.
Well, mainly when, and I always use myself as an example. I'm willing to be the guinea pig of the conversation, but I mainly use zone 2 to warm up enough that I don't hurt anything when I do punch 11 which is on a treadmill, because I tend to work out inside.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Because that's part of the workout, but you're not spending the whole workout in zone.
Yeah, correct. So for women just starting out, I mean, listen, some of the people who choose to listen to me, literally I took a walk in New York and encouraged them, let's just go take a walk in New York.
Yeah.
That was it for them. So
that's good.
I know, right? But then as they're more comfortable with that in a streak type way, they've done it for a period of days, then that's when you start. Now, in your book, you do talk about shorter intervals, 8-12, which I don't know how to go fast for 8 seconds, and then 12-30 seems more manageable to me.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Absolutely. And when people are first starting out, I say, well, if you're going for a walk and you get into the steady state, then you just increase your pace, or maybe you find some stairs. Anything that's, So like I live in a place that's super flat except for one pseudo mountain. It takes maybe, 20 minutes to walk up. But they have 1,000 stairs that get you to the top. So, I encourage people to walk or run up 3 flights and then walk down 2. So that the 30 seconds for the 3 flights up, and then it takes you 1.5 to 2 minutes to come down, turn around, catch your breath, do it again. So you eventually make it to the top, but you're spending 15 minutes to get there instead of up and down in 20 minutes. So it's just how do you increase that topping capacity in whatever your fitness level is. If you're walking flat, increase your pace. If you have an undulation, maybe you walk up that hill. So I think it's scary when we say sprint interval training.
Yeah, I think so. People are intimidated by the word, and yet it's intended just to mean increase this good stress that we're putting, the demand. Yeah.
Yes.
Because you know what, I firmly believe, and say this to my patients, that because they're doubting themselves, can I do this, more of this talk? I said, there is never an age or skill level. Your body will not respond to the stress you put on it, right? So you're just designed to be dynamic and to achieve a new level of homeostasis. And we doubt ourselves because we just can't envision ourselves do it. We think it's for the few, and actually be for the many.
Right. I got into a little bit of trouble when I was at the female athlete conference this past year in Boston,
Yeah.
where I was presenting about active peri and postmenopausal women. And I said that 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity is absolutely not appropriate for this population. And there's a woman in the audience who was one of the ex-presidents of ACSM. And she's like, excuse me, we have lots of research to show. And I was like, in my head, I was like, male research. But then I was like, for people who are just starting out, that's achievable. Moderate intensity is going to polarize what they're doing, which is fine. But for women who are already active and really trying to get metabolic change, body composition change, they have to polarize. They have to add in that resistance training as the bedrock, and they have to do that. That kind of placated her, but I was like, yeah, just the movement part is good, but I still don't agree with that moderate intensity because it wrecks people. It makes people go too hard to be easy to accommodate that aerobic capacity. And it's too easy to be hard to accommodate for that extra stress that we're doing. And like I said, men age in that linear fashion, so it's fine. But for women, even if you're just starting out, you have to learn to polarize.
Well, and the good news is that we're not asking you to go faster or more intense for 3 hours.
No.
For minutes. Anybody could do anything for a matter of minutes, right? There's badassery enough in you to do it. So, and there are probably millions of testimonials in your following, but this recomposed my body.
It's fantastic.
It does. I mean, I have access to body composition things, and I know I lost 10% of my body fat with
fantastic.
I know, right? It's a joyful thing. Even at the age where somebody's doubting whether I can do a
Spartan race.
Hell, whatever. Okay, so that's cardio. And for all the reasons we just talked about. But, now, I have a coffee cup in my office. I should have brought it. It says lift heavy shit. You should have trademarked it. Somebody put it on a coffee cup.
Well, we have them too with the Dr. Stacy Sims brand.
Oh, I need to get yours.
Well, just send me your address and I'll send you some stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about lifting, because if I have to say one more time, put down the mamby-pamby pink weights, don't waste your time, you might as well not. It's just the indoctrination of lycra tights and mamby-pamby pink weights. I can't stand it, because who wants to be mamby-pamby with a weak handshake? Not this girl. So the most common question I get, again, is what does heavy mean? So let's go into the science. What do you mean when, I've read your book, I can tell you, but what do you mean when you say lift heavy? Mm-hmm. How many reps do you start people out with?
Yep. So I'll give the background of why we want to lift heavy. So when we look at estrogen itself, as you know, it's responsible for that muscle satellite cell production because of estrogen receptors. Mm-hmm. It's also responsible for how strongly myosin binds to actin. So those are our two contractile proteins. Mm-hmm. When we lose estrogen, we lose a strong muscle contraction. The third thing estrogen does is it is responsible for how much acetylcholine are in the vesicles that allow the nerve impulse to jump over the gap junction to stimulate muscle fibers. So when we lose estrogen, we lose not only lean mass, but we also lose our power, strength, and speed. So we want to look at, again, a different stressor that is going to cause these adaptations that estrogen used to. So we're going to look for central nervous system response. So when we are lifting heavy and heavy loads, it is a central nervous system response because we're having a nerve come down and it's trying to recruit as many muscle fibers as it possibly can to lift a load. Mm-hmm. The muscle contraction has to be strong. And by the nature of that, we also have to have lean mass. So what we get from lifting heavy is the feedback that we have to have fast conduction. So we get more acetylcholine in those vesicles for faster transmission. We need to have a strong muscle contraction. So we have more stimulus, actin and myosin to bond strongly. And then we also have the stimulus of we need more lean mass overall to overcome the stress. So then we have the stimulus of muscle protein synthesis. Mm-hmm. So what do I mean by lift heavy? So when we're looking in the strength and conditioning world, we look at more power-based stuff where we're going 3 to 5 exercises, 3 to 5 minutes recovery between exercises, and we want 3 to 5 sets of each. So we go by the 3 to 5 rule, and it's at 80% or more of 1 rep max. So what does that mean when we talk about it from a translational general person point of view?
Yep.
It means that you are going to lift a load with proper technique that is one where you will fail at the 5th rep. And if you're doing 3 sets of 5, on that 3rd set of 5, you're really, really shaking to finish that last 4th and 5th rep. If you can do more than that, it's not heavy enough. Yeah. And I don't want someone to go, oh, I heard Vonda's podcast and I have to go do 100-kilo deadlift. No. I mean, phase in. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It's not a training block. It is an eye to lifestyle and longevity. So we want to phase our way in. We want to learn how to move well. We want to work with mobility. Maybe we start with body weight and then work it to heavier dumbbells, not the pink little 2-pounders, but we're like starting with 10 and working your way up. And then learning barbell work and getting confident with the bar. You might need to hire a personal trainer, or some people don't even want to do that. So they might do an intro class at CrossFit so they understand like what it means to move with the bar. There's lots of ways of getting into it in an entry level, but it's so important. It's the bedrock to learn how to do that heavier lifting and then periodize it too, which could be a different conversation, but it's not doing the same thing day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out. It's changing it up because your body does respond. It responds quickly, and you need to change it up to keep.
And some people would say, my husband says this in our house, that you have to confuse your body a little bit because it gets into a habit. It's too easy. The pathways are too laid down, and then it's not enough stimulation. So, I think that explanation is so simple and so clear, but it frightens people. The thought of, so I love the advice to start body weight, mimic the motions, mimic
exactly.
Have people doing heavier things do, whether you're just like this, pretending you're squatting. If your hips don't move, if your ankles don't have the motion, if your knees, you're going to pull something. And that is not the way to start out trying to do goodness for yourself.
Even using a broomstick. So you have a broomstick that's super light and as a bar. So you have to learn how to set it on your shoulders and your traps and keep upright. Because you see a lot of people doing a squat and they're just going like this, sit it down, right? So they're just
that thing's
sort of,
yeah, so dangerous. So then 3 times a week, 2 minimum, 3 times a week ish, right?
And as we get older, we need to add more in. So this is the dose response. Early post-menopause, which is like the first 5 to 6 years after menopause. Yeah, you can get by with 2 to 3 times a week. But as you get further away, you need to add more times in because it becomes a dose response. But now you're not spending as much time in the gym. You're looking at, 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes or 20 minutes, 40 minutes, but more times.
Is it better to do a total body lift or to do it like you read the bodybuilders do? We have a leg day, an arm day. What is better for our bodies in your thoughts?
Whatever fits in. I'm a big fan of compound movements and because of my physique, I put upper body muscle on really quickly and I lose lower body really, really quickly. So I do a lot of compound lower body posterior chain movements based on my physique. But then I look at some of my friends and they do total body because they have it more of an even distribution of how they put muscle mass.
Got it.
And we might be in the gym for the same amount of time. We're just doing different exercises. So it really is what fits for you and how you want to program it.
So I noticed significant changes, not as significant as they became, but even changes in a month. But what is the don't give up time? 3 months, 6 months, you don't give up yet.
Yeah. we start to say, 6 weeks, you'll definitely see a huge progression in the strength component and maybe a small amount of change body composition wise. Do not pay attention to weight on the scale.
Yes.
As you build muscle weighs more than fat because it has more stuff in it. You will find your clothes are fitting better in about 6 weeks, but give yourself 3 months. Definitely give yourself 3 months.
The other thing that I want to touch on is the fact that when many women walk around because they've read the lie that women need 800 calories a day and they should eat like rabbit. I know, listen, every magazine on the shelf. And so when I'm introducing to them the idea that we may need to eat more well, they all want to lose weight, but to eat more to lose weight, right? The conversation about metabolic rate comes up, and so I would love to talk about how by building more lean muscle mass, we actually can affect our metabolic rate. I mean, again, people that I take care of, and even myself, I increase my basal metabolic rate by about 150 calories.
Nice.
In the first 6 months, and it's because I put in some muscle, but that is what we're going for, right? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when we look at people who don't eat enough, there's lots of repercussions. We see it from like the sport terminology, relative energy deficiency in sport or low energy availability. Mm-hmm. And we see that after 4 days of not eating enough with activity, you have a downturn of your thyroid function and you have an affection in your hypothalamus where you're starting to get the area in the brain that's responsible for appetite and leptin, ghrelin production, and, the homeostasis there gets to be affected. So appetite has a misstep. So unfortunately, people won't feel as hungry the less that they eat. But the downside is the first thing that goes is lean mass because it's very metabolically hungry. So if we flip it and go, okay, we want to put more lean mass on because it is such an active tissue, it, quote, burns more calories at rest. What I mean by that is because it is comprised of a lot of amino acids, it also has creatine in it. It's very active itself with just isometric contractions, actin, myosin coming together. It's always active. So it always needs some kind of fuel. Whereas fat, we thought it was completely inert. It's not completely inert, but it does not have the same metabolic draw as muscle mass.
Yeah.
So the more lean mass we put on, not only do we feel better because we now don't have all the niggles, but we also can eat and still lose body fat. So it's really essential to put on that lean mass. And unfortunately, the conversation for women has been and still is pervasive that we need to be small and take up less space. That's why you see all of these ads for use this diet aid, do this kind of diet, lose. And I'm like, no, the first thing that people need to do is eat protein because we see how much protein affects body composition in a positive manner. Sedentary women to increase their protein to 1.6 grams per kilo, no exercise, complete recomp in 12 weeks. Just the protein, right? And then when you add exercise, specifically resistance exercise, it really increases that recomp to a more positive aspect where we now are seeing a little bit of muscle definition. We are having more metabolically active tissue all the time. We're having better brain neurotransmitters from the conversation between the resistance training, the gut microbiome, and the brain. So it becomes a bedrock. The resistance training with protein is so incredibly essential.
Right. And women are, even people. I mean, I question the men in my practice too about their protein intake. We are just under-proteined. At least in my practice in Florida, they're under-proteined and wonder why, in general, every day at 3:00, we're so sluggish. We have no energy level. We can barely keep our eye. Well, we're just under-fueled. All the things.
All the things, yeah.
Yep, all those things, all the foundational. So I literally could go on for 3 hours with you, but if you know what, I think we've talked about a lot of really basic things today. for the athletes you take care of, it's easier to layer on because they have an amazing foundation. For the mere mortal athletes like myself, I've taken the time over the last few years to layer on all the things that we just talked about and can now, I'll get your opinion on this in 2 seconds. And now I'm going to reproduce one of the studies that you cite in your book about sprinting and the 12 weeks. And I don't have a way to measure my satellite cell content, but I sure would love to, because now I'm capable of layering on. But for women who have bought into the myth of the negative talk about this amazing midlife that we are, right? I count midlife as arbitrarily 65 to 35 to upper 60s, depending. I mean, it's just loose, right? But this amazing period, when you don't buy into the negative self-talk, you have the opportunity to reinvent yourself. But for the women who are just stepping out, we talked about a lot of stuff. It's overwhelming when you get someone who's starting. If you have to choose the sprint intervals or the lean muscle mass or the protein, what is the one you would start a beginner on and then layer and then layer? Because I find I can have 14 things that I want a person to work on, but I only choose 2 or 3, and then we layer. So
then we layer.
Wow.
So the first thing is just movement in general with protein, right? Okay. So it's the focus on the protein, and so many people, like, they'll go do their exercise and then they're stagnant for the rest of the day. So I tell people when I'm traveling, I make sure that I have high protein and I walk 12,000 steps a day, just moving. So I'm very conscious of parking further away from places I need to be. And it actually stimulates, you feel like you've done something. So for anyone who is starting, it's getting that higher protein intake and moving, having more breaks and just moving. So it's parking further away, just all the basic things that you talk about. You in general as in sports and fitness space. Yeah, people. When you have that over the course of like 3 or 4 weeks, you just get in the habit of moving. That's when you start adding in specific movement. So you're squatting and seeing how you move, because then we want to add in the resistance training.
Got it.
The last thing would be the sprint stuff, because when we're looking at the whole aspect of longevity and improving body composition, that resistance training and protein is the foundation. And then we're adding in that sprint stuff for a little bit more cardio, metabolic health and those kinds of things. But you still garner so much of your cardiac and metabolic health from resistance training as well.
Yeah. So my last question, because I've got this little scheme, I've been talking to the researchers I've been interviewing about this. I really feel like women are so desperate to feel better that I think, don't laugh at me, I think I'm going to do this. If I started a GoFundMe campaign and said, listen, everybody give $1, we are going to fund some researchers to be able to ask the questions they're dying to ask. Because for those of you who don't know it, many elite researchers end up spending a predominance of their time writing grants to actually be able to answer the questions. What if we could free them from that burden by each, 200 million women giving $1? If we fund any study that you would want answered, what would that be?
I got asked this question the other day, and I think it's age dependent. So if we're looking at younger, it is more of a sociocultural global study to understand cultural influence on menstrual cycle and removing that taboo. So we can get rid of get rid of the period poverty, get rid of the stigma, and empower women from the time they're 8 onwards. But when we get into the peri and postmenopausal state, I really, really want to do an intervention that is nutrition, exercise, and then specific non-pharmaceuticals, so different adaptogens versus MHT.
That would be interesting, because there is always the question. And I always phrase it that way. It is your body. You do the research. You decide. Just as I use HT doesn't mean you do. But
right.
Your study would really enable people to make a true comparison.
Yeah.
What
Yep,
you're saying
exactly.
has been done.
Yeah. And it'd be a crossover, right? So you'd have a big washout crossover.
Mhm.
And the conversation that is so like predominant down here is that you should be on hormone therapy because of all the changes, but they don't follow up with you also have to do the work. No one follows up with you have to do the exercise and the nutrition stuff. So people are like, oh, I feel so awful. I better go into hormone therapy because they don't know what are the other options. And then as you dig into the research, you'll see the research on HT that's like, yes, it improves bone density. It slows the rate of lean mass loss. It helps people put lean mass on. But there isn't the conversation of, but if you didn't do that, you did this, you might get the same, if not better. So that's the big study I really want to do.
I would love for you to be able to do that. So I'm going to keep hatching this scheme. I know. And then we'll assign them.
And we can be co-primary investigators on it.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Continents here, right across the ocean. That would be great.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Stacy Sims, thank you for writing these books. Thank you for personally changing the lives of everybody I take care of, because I quote you every day.
Oh, thank you.
And for the work you do. And thanks for being on our podcast, Hot for Your Health. So
yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Good. I hope you have a fabulous day. I'm Dr. Vonda Wright. See you next week.